And Louise, welcome.
Hi, thank
And
you.
where are you
Good to
calling
be
from
here.
today?
The Isle of Man.
The Isle of Man. Wow. I think you're first. I've reached 42 countries, but I've never had anyone from the Isle of Man.
Oh, now it's 43.
Wow. Wonderful. We have a few more people coming in. Mm. And I've got some slides, but we'll put them up in a few minutes. I just want to make sure everybody gets settled in and feels welcome. And we have Rajesh and Daniel. Excellent. And Rajesh, where are you calling from today?
Sorry, my video is a problem. I'm calling from Mumbai, India.
Okay, wonderful. And Mia, where are you from today?
Yes, hello, Oakland, California.
Oh, from the Bay Area. Excellent. Yeah. And Daniel, how about you?
I'm from the Redmond, Washington area.
Okay. And Mia, are you surviving the torrential rains?
Yes, I do live on a hill though, so we have constant like movement of dirt uphill, which feels very counterintuitive with nature's wishes.
I think there was this guy called Sisyphus who did that for a long time.
I'm sure there's some deep lessons I'm experiencing here with the constant reshuffling.
Yeah, good. Well, wonderful. So I'd like to, and Colin has joined us. So Colin is one of our, and there's Rebecca Perry. Excellent. Colin is one of our faculty members. He and Emma teach in our ID Way program. And so we'll chime in a bit later when we talk about ID just to see what Colin might add. And there's Miss Rebecca Perry, the one and only. And it's got this really cool green kind of filter going there. Wow. And Sabine's come back in. And Miriam. And which state are you in today, Miriam? Miriam's finding her audio. Can you hear us now, Miriam? I was asking, what state are you in today?
Oh, Montana.
Okay. Always have to check. So wonderful.
Here for the winter.
Yeah.
Happy
And
New
Sabine,
Year.
welcome back. And where are you today?
I'm in France, Narbonne.
Okay. Wonderful. Oh, so Rebecca's back to normal now. So her psychedelic period is over.
Hi.
Hi. Wonderful. All right. Well, really, the purpose of the session today was just to introduce you to a little bit of a flavor of each of our three programs, see what questions you have, what thoughts you have in terms of making choices for yourself. And one of the things that I really appreciate about our work in our community is that we're ever evolving. Part of why we've done well in the pandemic is we're quite nimble on our feet to be able to try to address what we sense is happening out there. And one of the big reasons why I created narrative coaching, which is where it all began about 20 some odd years ago, was I wasn't really convinced that a lot of the ways in which coaching was taught were effective in the sense that they always presumed that one could know what to do and one could set a goal to reach what one would do, and that would happen in a straight line and you could just go do that. And I never experienced life working like that. And so in this time where so much feels uncertain, it feels like our work is particularly well suited to allow ourselves to sit with uncertainty and sit with the unknown to discover what actually is trying to happen. And sometimes that's in line with what we thought was going to happen or wanted to happen, and sometimes not. And so we teach practitioners to work with others to be with what is and to start there and nowhere else. And so we'll give you just a couple of samples of that today. So before I begin, is there anything in particular that any of you have on your mind that brought you here today that you'd like to make sure that we talk about?
What you've described, David, just feels on target, a sample as well as context.
Okay, great.
Sounds really good.
And Rajesh got his video to work, and Mia has a question.
Yeah, I heard you on Coaches Rising, and I was particularly intrigued with just how you discussed coaching evolving in this moment, even from where it's been. So I'm interested to hear where you see things are now, and where they're headed, and how that's embedded in the programs.
Okay. Yeah, we've got actually some really exciting research projects next year in that direction. Really excited to see kind of what unfolds. And just as a signaling of part of that, where I'm writing a series of papers to make a case to move beyond competence models as a way to measure coaches. I've always found it absurd, and I find it even more absurd now. We can do that. So Miriam, interested in hearing more about, okay, also great. We can do that. So when we get to the narrative coaching part, remind me again if I forget, and I'll share some more about that. So I'm going to just orient ourselves around some slides for a minute. I think this is where we need to be. Yeah. And that will just kind of give us some anchoring. There we go. So I'm going to sort of imagine that we're around a campfire together. And so I look at this as a conversation, and we'll give you a couple of small experiences to kind of get us going. So I thought, one could never go wrong by starting with poetry. So there's several pieces of significance. One, I'm just going to draw your attention to the photo itself. So I think it was Daniel from Redmond. So Daniel might know the answer to this question, but so one of the things that this photo means to me is that I spent a week on this island. It's called Pender Island. It's in the Gulf Islands in Western Canada. You're looking back at the United States. Where those islands are, I have actually kayaked a number of times looking out at this island, and always wondered what that was like to be there. And then I had a chance 3 or 4 years ago before the pandemic to spend a week there. It is one of the most amazingly lovely places on the planet. And so one of the things that we do a lot in our program is help people, both practitioners and clients, be able to look at the same situation from new perspectives. That one of the things I've discovered over the years is that the essence of what we do is actually much simpler than we realize. That we often effort to learn all these things and do all these things and worry about, are we doing enough? And when in reality, what most of us need as a support for change is often a series of steady pivots. And so it's ironic. I've spent years getting 4 degrees, writing a ton, studying coaching for, like there's no tomorrow. And then as I move deeper into this part of my life, I'm letting go of more and more. And so what you'll get in many ways is not like a building up of something. It's actually helping us to compost a lot of what we don't really need anymore, to curate what is the essence of what you all know and who you are, and then being able to channel that in small, beautiful pieces when you're working with clients. And so I think of this photo just as sort of an anchoring of that. And we're looking at what is our life or our client's life trying to reveal to the client and to us in the midst of what we're doing. And if you, Colin, would you do me a favor, please? And would you be willing to just check in the chat box as we go? So if you have comments or questions, I'm going to keep motoring along and stop and ask for questions. But if there's something that resonates for you or comes up for you as we go, just drop it in the chat box. And Colin, if you'd be willing just to call it out when you see that. Otherwise, I get distracted.
Good, David.
Thanks, appreciate that. We're going to just give you three, just so you get some benefit even from this conversation, look at three key elements of what we do, and each one provides a glimpse in particular into one of the programs. And then we'll look at a bit at the end about what questions you have left over. So
a little bit under the sink here, and then we'll do the floor. It's not bad under the sink here, just quick.
So someone, let's see if it's Kathy. Anyways, someone's got exciting things happening under their sink. So for me, so it's perfect cosmic timing. So one of the core pieces of our philosophy is that we trust that everything we need is right in front of us. And when we come from that place of trust, rather than trying to keep stirring things up with powerful questions or things we're supposed to be doing, we're actually realizing that a lot of what we're after is letting the muddy waters that our clients come in when they're all churned up about something settle out so we can all see kind of what's actually happening. I found this graphic on the web, and actually have had some lovely correspondence with the woman who painted this picture. And we use this a lot as an analogy for, there's a lot of things happening in the surface for our clients, kind of above water, but in reality, those are manifestations of things that are happening at deeper levels for them. And so we're trying to, rather than make something happen in coaching, we're trying to say, what's incubating already? What's wanting to be born already? What are the roots of what is happening that is trying to generate something? And so that's how we allow ourselves to actually work with much more ease and, I find, efficacy, because again, we're not trying to tell the plant how to be a better plant. We're trying to help the plant come to life, if you will. And so this is the sort of the core of everything that we do, but I want to talk a bit about narrative release as one of our offers. For most people that are new to what we do, we encourage you to start with narrative coaching because it's the one that we've done for the longest. It's the easiest in some ways to grasp because it's in the frame of coaching. And you might feel like you have enough of coaching right now, and you might choose to come into our narrative release program. So I want to just give you one of the key concepts that we really focus a lot on in narrative release, and then see if you have any other questions about the program itself. So we focus a lot, again, on helping our clients to be aware of the state they're currently in, and to look at how that state is sort of manifesting in behaviors and mindsets and stories, and how they might need to find ways to what we think of as self-regulate, to be able to move into a state, an inner state that might be more optimal for what they're trying to do. And so an example of this would, so they can come back to center, be more present, and address what's happening around them. So it might be that, you're working with a client who tends to live in their head. And when you ask them any question, even one that's about their current experience, they get lost in thinking and talking, and there's this sort of swarm of words and not really any awareness of what is actually happening for them. And so you might notice this disconnect between their body language and their words. Like their body language is expressing significant tension. Their language is everything is fine. And so part of the self-regulation for this person would be what would allow them to let go and be with their current experience without having to explain it away or deflect it or get lost in it, to actually notice how they're actually doing. So if they're going to change any of their behaviors, they're going to have to be able to come to a state that allows them to actually be aware of themselves. And so a lot of our work with them early on in any of our programs, but particularly we focus on this in narrative releases, what stories would they have to let go of, at least temporarily, to allow space for another possibility. And so we spend a lot of time working on that. And we go much deeper than in the other two programs into some of the work I've done on attachment theory and coaching, helping you be aware of what gets activated and triggered in you. If you're going to stand at a threshold with somebody else making a big choice in life or work or dealing with a big issue like grief, being aware of how that shows up in you is really important to be able to do that for others. We really can only take our clients as far as we've gone ourselves. Otherwise, we'll tend to withdraw or rescue or do something to deflect our own inner experience. And so we do a lot of work on developing your capacity to be in this space or be in the field with what's happening for the client. Just as a point of reference, the ID program and our program actually are two halves of the same coin. They both have to do with how do we show up in the moment that's happening with the client. And R is much more about your inner journey for you to be able to do that for yourself and then therefore for your clients in whatever capacity you play. It's also then will help you learn to do the same for the client so they can show up to themselves. The ID is more about the theory of learning and development. Now that you're present in the moment, how can you make the most of it to liberate the learning potential that's present? So there's sort of an inner and outer version of that same sort of ultimate strategy, which is how do you operate at thresholds with clients who are trying to make a change in their life, trying to learn something new, trying to activate a different part of their identity. So I'd like to give you just a simple experiment with this, and then see if you have any questions about the narrative release program. And then if not, we'll move on and talk a bit about narrative coaching. So for this one, it's one of my favorite activities. We do this a lot. And so what I'd like you to do for right now, if you don't mind, is just to close your eyes and just to settle into your chair. And whatever that means for you, you might notice like your feet on the floor, just letting them relax and be there. You might, without any extra effort, just notice your breathing.
But my vacuum did not. The vacuum didn't work because I had no bags. Yeah. I know that vacuum.
David, that's Aura. Could you block her down?
Yeah, I'm just trying to, oh, there she is. Okay, thank you. Thank you. So again, this perfect timing. This is great. I really appreciate the synchronicity of this. So I would like you just to kind of return to a sense of quiet and peace for yourself. And without efforting to change it, just notice what's happening with your breath. As you observe your breath going in and out, just notice what parts of your torso are moving. Maybe what parts of your torso are not moving. And how might you gently invite more breath into those spaces that might need some more relaxation or energy to breathe. So maybe it's like not holding so much tension in your stomach. Maybe it's about letting your back or shoulders relax. Maybe your breath wants to make some sound. From this place, I would like you to just think of something that's on your mind at the moment that might be either perturbing you, annoying you, confusing you, something that's generating some energy that you would like to release to allow yourself to move forward with whatever it is that you're having energy around. So it might be like, if I were to do this for myself, I might notice that my car is in my driveway with a flat tire. And so I might be preoccupied as I think about how I'm going to resolve that today. Anything that would allow you to release what's in your mind to come back to the present moment. And so just maybe create a headline for that story. For me, it would be flat tire in the driveway. And just something to anchor in, and notice what happens to your body when you really bring up this situation in your mind. How does it affect your breathing? How does it affect your body? What stories are you making up? And so for our first step in this, I'd like you just to pause that story and just allow yourself to, with intention and consciousness, just exhale. Just allow your body to do its thing and all the air to just leave your body. And maybe there's a sighing sound that comes with that. Everyone's on mute, so no one can hear you. Just to pause and allow yourself to exhale, to let go of any holding around whatever's on your mind. And allow you, even for these couple of minutes, for your mind to quiet itself. When our mind is quiet, our body gets the message, everything is going to be okay. And when our body has this sense, it allows itself to relax. And so when we can relax, we can actually allow ourselves to trust. Trust that there will be a solution to the tire in my driveway. Trust that the more I stress about it, the less likely I am to be very thoughtful about how I take care of it. When I relax, I trust and don't worry that it has to be done right now. And one of the things we find when our body relaxes, it makes it much easier to connect with our heart. Sometimes when we don't connect to our heart, we say things we regret, we act in haste and we've now created two problems instead of one. We forget the relationship to the person that we might have difficulty with. So just allow yourself to just scan your body and notice as you're thinking of this thing in your mind, are you holding any tension around this in your body? And what would it be like to relax, to allow yourself to actually connect with your heart? When we're connected to our heart, we actually can open ourselves. When we're protecting our heart, or our heart is hardened against someone or something, we tend to be closed down, which makes it much more difficult to resolve whatever was on our mind. When we allow ourselves to open, we actually allow ourselves to notice more of the whole truth. We're more able to speak to that truth, and we're more able to access our own inner wisdom. And so as you relax into whatever was on your mind, maybe you're holding it more gently now, or you're seeing it in a new light. What does that open up in you? What truth might be more available to you now? Maybe it's a truth about yourself. Maybe it's a truth about the situation. Maybe it's a recognition that you are looking at things from a very limited perspective. So just notice now what happens and what emerges for you when you allow yourself to open to whatever was on your mind. And When we can do that, we can live more fully, we can make better choices, we can speak more capably to others, and be more in integrity and wholeness for ourselves. So as we bring this activity to a close, I just would invite you to notice what is possible now that may not have been as possible before. And what would it be like to pause, relax, and open more often? So when you're ready, I'd like you to come back into the room. And if you would like to share anything, you're welcome to either write that in the chat box if that's easier for you. If you'd like to speak to your experience, feel free to, I can see everyone, so we can just raise your hand and we can go on. There we go.
There's nothing in the chat, David,
Okay.
at the moment. I think we're a small community, it'd be nice for people to share.
Yeah.
Daniels, I was able to relax and feel less defensive about emerging challenge. Well, I arrived from a trip last night and David, you gave me a moment of deep relaxation. So I'm sorry about that. But I really felt completely and
Yeah. Louise.
Thank you. Yes, thank you. I had deep relaxation, letting go. And that I didn't have an aha moment, nothing. I didn't have insight other than it was really good to let go and relax.
Yeah.
So I don't know how long I've got to stay relaxed.
Well, the good news is
probably a long time.
Yeah. Well, and the good news, you can use this more than once.
Yeah.
I find for me in coaching, this goes back to the Coaches Rising talk, I find aha moments are highly overrated. Because they often are short-lived. And what we're trying, one of the things that we're doing for this research I'm doing next year around moving beyond competencies is that another insight I've had after 25 years of coaching is that the primary variable I'm most interested in the conversation is, what is this human being ready for right now? And nothing else matters to me, because if they're not ready, then doesn't matter how generative the conversation is. And so the pausing, relaxing, and opening is like, what can they notice right now? What can they do something about right now? What's most vital to them right now? And so I find this activity really helpful to help the client actually gauge in coaching, if that's what you're doing, what's really true for them, but to begin to teach them things that they can use themselves. So one of the things that I'm proposing in these papers is that any assessment of a coach should be equally balanced between their ability to develop themselves and their ability to develop their client. There's nothing in any of the competency models I've found anywhere on the planet that assesses the client or asks the client. It's always about observation of the coach. It does not matter how good our coaching is. It's irrelevant. What matters is what happens for the client. And so for me, we have a lot of tools like this. They're most prominent in the narrative release program because it's really about self-development, but it's present in the other programs. Small tools that people can use frequently to help move into states to make learning and growth possible. All right. So Mia.
Would you repeat that, David?
Highly unlikely I can do that, but I'll give.
Oh, sorry. Something that makes growth possible.
Yeah, it's the problem with being in flow, you forget.
No worries, okay.
No, it's okay.
It's okay.
So I need to go back to the pier, and I need my coffee on the pier, Rebecca.
Sorry.
For me, I'm interested in providing small tools for my client that they can use in moments where learning would be possible if they could actually activate a state in themselves.
Got it. Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And someone had, Mia, I think, had your hand up. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, no, I was just going to share that tuning into myself somatically, I was able to see that I have some polarity going on. So I can move into both an active, enervated side and a blocked, pinching, crippling. So always helpful. And then to spend a few moments to be with both, to just allow that state and just observe it and relax with it a bit. So thank you.
Yeah, and so in narrative release in particular, rather than try to change that, we would help you just be with that. Because it's arrived for a reason and it serves a purpose. And so before we try to make it all better, we're going to try to understand why it's there in the first place and what it's all about. Anyone else want to share before we move on?
David, we had 3 lovely comments from Sabine, Rebecca, and Rashesh. Maybe Lawrence, you want to go on, and maybe the others would actually like to talk to what you wrote on.
Great.
Yeah, thanks. It was, I guess it follows on nicely with what was being said there. When you said about connecting to the heart, I was taking it literally. It's a somatic experience. But I guess the intellect was saying, what's this saying about my heart's desires? What's most meaningful? And then I dropped that thought and dropped into my body. So I kind of, it's like, so when you then elaborated on, what makes it easier for me what state is it easier for me to learn and grow? Well, it's probably that more relaxed state where there is some, connection to my heart.
Yeah. Great, thank you.
And David, just a quick resume from some of the comments. It was more people similar to Lawrence, getting there and then letting go and actually letting go of the weight or letting go of the bigger things.
Yeah. And so I think the last thing, following up on that, Colin, the last thing I'll say about the narrative release program, then I'd like to move on and share a bit more about the other two, but in many ways, it's like a 9-month retreat. It's not a program. We're not going to teach you. You'll have tons of resources about attachment theory and our approaches to grief and a lot of other kind of resources. But Carolyn, who, my dear friend and colleague who lives in the UK, she'll teach the morning session, so that fits her time zone. And I'll teach the afternoon session, and then have chances in all the programs to meet in small groups. But it's really an experiential journey for yourself, so that you can observe yourself holding space for others, notice what that's look like. So to go back to Mia's observation, so if I'm feeling this polarity in myself, how's that manifesting when I'm working with clients, and which parts do I tend to show them and not show them, and which ones are more prominent when I'm working with them, and what is that about? And we feel, I've been working with this work for a long time, but I just started teaching it in a way because I was doing a lot of retreats and finding that people were asking, how can I do this more with my clients? And then also through the pandemic, realizing the enormous mental health challenges that even we as trained professionals have experienced, and the need to hold more uncertain spaces with clients feels even more important. So we decided to bring the narrative release program back out again. And so I'm really excited by what Carolyn and I have put together for you, if that's what you decide to do for the year. Yeah. All right, so let me just see what we have next. Oh, yeah. So Gregory's my dear friend who lives up on the San Juan Islands, actually lives on one of the islands. It's in the photograph that we started with. He's a long-standing Buddhist teacher and friend, and this borrows from part of his work. So I'd like to just give us a little bit of a feel now for Narrative Coach. So this is something that I've been doing, like I said, for 20 years. And so one of the things I think is going back to this thing about emergent and ready. So the essence of narrative coaching, let me just take this back so you don't have to be distracted by it, is that we teach you how to be with and work with the stories that your clients are telling you, and to bring the stories into the room and work with them in real time. So we do work a lot with the characters in the story. We work a lot with the storytelling itself, like what are we observing about the person who's telling that story? How aware are they of themselves? What are we noticing happens when they tell the story, et cetera, et cetera. What we don't set goals. We do everything in present moment. And so we do a lot around creating new experiences for our clients, creating real-time experiments with them, to begin to sample how else they might show up in the world. And a lot of it has to do with just helping in a first phase of that work to help clients situate themselves in this moment, in the conversation, in their story, before we try to get anywhere. The narrative coaching model is not really a coaching model. It actually comes from anthropology. It's actually built around a rite of passage. Its origins were actually in my work as a grief counselor when I began my career, and recognizing that how people actually grieved didn't match most of what I was reading. And so the narrative coaching model really is a natural frame for how humans change. And rather than we're not guiding our clients through the process. In many ways, if I think about my most frequent feedback to coaches that I work with, is to invite them to stop coaching. Just stop coaching. Just be quiet and notice the human being that's in front of you. And we say that because we're actually coming alongside somebody as they're walking towards whatever they're trying to discover or do. And we're helping them notice where they are on that journey and what might actually be helpful for them right now. And we're using the frame not to go, we have to go from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5. It's more like, oh, they seem stuck in 2. They're ruminating, they're going round and around. I got to read 10 more books, or I got to do this and this and this. So what is that about? And what would help them let go of that and actually move forward and try something? And the last thing I'll share about that, then I'll just give you this quick illustration of it, is that what I observe that children are allowed, but adults are not, is a safe place to practice. So any of you who've had children or been around children, or maybe were a child once yourself, imagine what it'd be like if you had a toddler who's finally learned to stand up, maybe even without holding on to something, as a precursor to walking. And they take their first step to let go of your leg and try to go on their own, and they fall down. And then we grade them or scold them or chastise them or whatever for failing to walk. No parent would do that, right? We cheer them on because we realize that the ability to walk is a series of 10,000 not walking steps. And yet when we get to adults, like in the workplace, we want to judge them. We want to scold them. We want to say, go to this workshop, then mentally transform 50 years of behavior as a result of 4 hours of whatever. And what I realized is that most of our adult clients don't need any more training. They actually don't even need coaching. What they need is a safe, structured space to practice being somebody they're not yet, or to practice being in the world in a way they don't feel permission to be now. And so when I'll teach you more, tell you more about ID in a minute, but a lot of what we're doing in narrative coaching is making it safe for people to discover who and how they want to be and give them a chance to do that with us in the session. One of the legions of reasons why we don't set goals is that I tell my clients, if you can't do this right now with me, you won't do it when you leave. Because when you leave, you're going to go back into all the pressures that drive the behavior you're trying to change. And there's nobody on the planet who cares more about you than I do right now. So what will it take for you to try something now in the direction that you would like to explore? And I'm not attached to what they choose, but we have a lot of fun. And so we engage in a lot what we call serious play. It's allows us to bring a little bit of improv and a little bit of humor to help them let down enough of their defenses to allow themselves to try. And so one of the ways that we can do that is that we move beyond the traditional view of coaching as a client comes, the client tells a story, we figure out what the problem is in their story, and then we help them find a solution. Most of what our clients bring to us don't have solutions. They just are. It's life. And even the ones that do, when we rush to identify the problem, it's almost inevitably a symptom. It's not the problem. And so we're just going to be with the story. And we're going to let the story tell us where do we actually want to pay attention. So the way we think about this is that all of this is available, all 4 of these elements are available all at the same time. From the minute the client sits down, all of this is present. The understanding of the problem is present, even if we can't see it yet. And what they need to do next is present, even if they don't know what that is yet. So we bring the context in which the client exists into the room. So we bring in a lot of sort of sociological dimensions to people's stories and lives, and to get beyond the hyper focus on the individual in most coaching. We bring the client and the story into the room. We don't really frame things in terms of problems, but clients do. So we allow that into the room, and then we understand what that really is. And a lot of that takes place in real time in the field, that sort of energetic space that's created when 2 people are present. So we don't know which of these elements are going to be where we're going to spend our time, what we need to be doing. We just know that life is not like a linear progression. It's all present at once. And we're going to draw on whatever we need to help the client find the resolution to their story in a way that would allow them to move forward in a new way. All right. So I think this is, so I paraphrase this bit from Albert Schweitzer. This is a way to kind of summarize what we're trying to do with our clients in narrative coaching. So I'm going to talk about ID next, but I wanted just to see any questions you have if narrative coaching if that was what you were interested in, or just any questions you have about narrative coaching and or what in particular would like to know about my talk at Coaches Rising and WBEX, because it was part of the similar talk. Yeah.
Just I wonder if you could give an example. You did give one in the talk. I'd love to hear another one. I think the one in your talk, if I recall, that resonates was like a client even sharing with you what was or wasn't working. Someone who needs to develop assertiveness, if I'm recalling
Yes.
correctly, and asking them, well, be assertive with me now.
Yes.
Experiment in this way. But if you could give another example, that would be appreciated.
Yeah. So my favorite example was when before the pandemic, when I could travel, we were doing a narrative coaching event in Amsterdam, and it was just a really great group of people, a lot of fun, quite engaged in serious play. And there was a young woman in the program. I'm guessing she was probably in her mid-30s. It seems young now to me, but the who was very quiet, didn't speak up very much. And so at one point I was sort of on a break. I was just inquiring if everything was okay, and is there anything we could do differently to help her feel more engaged. And she was just sharing that she her two children were now in school, and so she's returning to work, but she wasn't feeling really confident about her ability to find work. And she didn't strike me as the kind for whom seeking work would be easy, even on a good day, but she was just really uncertain about herself. And so I said, so what would be helpful to you? And she said, well, some of these women here seem so confident, and I don't see myself that way. So would you like to meet some of them? So I introduced her to a couple of the older women in the group who were quite successful as coaches. And they sort of took her under their wings for the rest of the workshop / retreat. So the example of the story came when we were doing some things on archetypes. And one of the archetypes is the king and the queen. And so she realized she felt almost zero queen energy in herself. And so I said to this group of women who were working with her on this practice, what would it be like if you could make her a queen for the day? So they of course they said, yes. And so they so they went off to the other room, and we didn't, and then had like 20 or 30 minutes to work on this. And then they decided to spend their whole 30 minutes on her as their kind of project. And so, everybody's kind of coming back to the room, and we were kind of checking in. All of a sudden we hear this sort of faux trumpet sounds. Doo, 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 doo. And these three women come in sort of with their horns. They had created this like royal cape that they were holding behind her, and she was walking into the room as the queen, as queens do, and she's doing that kind of queen wave and having just the time of her life. And so then we processed all that. It gave her enough confidence to show up differently in the retreat. She ended up leaving the workshop with a half-time role as a coach on the team of one of the women in the room, because they really liked what she was offering, and they were trying to reach out to a younger audience. And so this woman so she had a half-time job already. But the best part of the story for me was she was not a very big person. She was fairly short, and because she was quiet, it was easy to overlook her. So we were getting together again in 6 months for a follow-up to this. And when we were doing check-ins, this young man shared the story about how it was rush hour at one of the busiest train stations in the Netherlands, wall-to-wall people on the platform. He's waiting for his kind of pushing through the crowd to get onto the car, and he sees this young woman and he waves at her. And then he looked and he realized that the platform was wall-to-wall people, except for where she was standing. There was like a meter-wide ring around her of empty space. That she was carrying such energy as the queen that people, and it wasn't like because the Dutch are very tall people. And here's this little person who somehow, in the way she was holding herself, managed to leave lots of room around herself, that somehow people knew this. So I don't have an explanation for that, but for me, it just felt like she had begun to internalize what it would be like to feel like a queen. And so again, we're not setting a goal about you need 3 new clients, you need to go do all these external things. It starts from what could you activate in yourself as a different starting point, a different narrative, that just by embodying that space would yield different outcomes than you would get otherwise. And so she spent time over the course in this sort of follow-up day, just experimenting with the good and the bad and the ugly of being queen, right? And so again, there were a couple of times when she overplayed her queen card and the older women pushed back. That again was part of her finding how that was true for her in a way that was safe, it was supportive, yeah, it was just really powerful and life-changing for her. So does that help?
Yeah, thank you. Helpful and a lovely image as well. I felt more queenly just listening to it myself. So thanks.
There you go. Yeah.
David, I had a question.
Yes, Rajesh.
Yeah. Thank you for a wonderful presentation so far. It's this time of the year, paradoxically, where everybody's talking about goals and, you know, smart goals and setting goals and looking at the year ahead. I'm quite curious to know when you mentioned about the process not involving any kind of goal setting, because the narrative that you hear all around you, practically, especially this time of the year, beginning of the year, is about, oh, have you set your goals straight? Have you got your resolutions done? Clients revel, I mean, in corporates, people revel in targets and goals. How does this whole new way of thinking land against this sort of existing narrative?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's something I've battled all my life. So I'm a big fan of goal theory. So in the sense of most of us do better if we have a focus, if we have an intention, if we structure our life, you know, so, you know, if we have a goal for good oral hygiene, but we don't own a toothbrush, right? We're not going to have good teeth, right? So there's this whole notion of having something to motivate us internally, intrinsic motivation, having structures in our life that allow us to move towards what we want. All those things are really important. One of the main reasons, I mean, I've done whole papers and talks on this, but 2 of the main reasons why we don't tend to set goals. One is goals tend to take somebody outside themselves to be over there, as opposed to being here. And 2, it presumes that I know exactly what I want and how to get there now. And so in our model, the first phase is called situate. It's a total acceptance and a loving kindness towards who and how the person is right now, with no effort to change anything. The 4th phase is sustain, which is in the journey between the beginning and then. What have they decided they would like to bring to their life, and do differently? So when you ask the person in situate to set a goal, they're going to set a goal based on their view of the world and themselves as it exists right now. In order to successfully achieve that goal, they will become someone else. Otherwise, they would already have achieved the goal. So I'm not interested in what the person who's shows up thinks they want, because I mean, I've coached for 25 years. I can count on one hand the clients that actually knew what they really wanted when they showed up for coaching. And so I don't waste our time asking them. I just tell them to tell me what's happening and true for you right now. And along the way, we come to discover what is actually true for them. So I want to use my energy to support. So we're really just interested in the beginning on what is the crux of the issue for this person. How do we help them show up to that, be more aware of it, more truthful about it, more present to it, and then to identify in that, what would they like to do differently that might move them towards a different place? And so we use what we call structures for success. So, but when they're in motion, when they're already moving into what they think they would like, we want to create structures so that they can be successful in the experiments with this right then and there. And in particular, when they go home, when things are going to be challenging, there's going to be headwinds, people pushing out against their desire for change, wanting them to stay the same. And so one of the reasons why we don't set goals in organizations is because there's no accountability for everybody else in your system. And you're expected to achieve your goal, even though the reason why you haven't thus far may have little to do with you and everything to do with your environment. And so we're mostly interested in how do we help a client find scaffolding as this new awareness emerges, or this new behavior emerges, or this new part of their identity emerges, what scaffolding that they can slowly build up the capacity and confidence to go live that out in their life. And again, clients are not, while clients value a coaching session, they're really not paying us for the coaching session. They're paying us for what they can do after the coaching session when we're not there to be with them. And so again, goals for me are often based in a fantasy that just because somebody had a great coaching session, they can go do that on their own when they leave. The people that can do that didn't need us in the first place as much. And so I want to get them to to slowly be able to build capacity across the sessions. So when they go out of the session, it's just an extension of what they've already been doing. And so what happens is that oftentimes clients in narrative coaching arrive at these amazing spaces, but they're not quite sure how they got there, but they're aware that everything's fundamentally changed. And then we help them sort of to describe that enough so it stays anchored in them. But oftentimes they end up in a place they never would have imagined when they began. So at the beginning of the year, for me, I do set some priorities, like where do I want to spend my energy this year? What are some of my areas of focus that I want to pay particular attention to? So I have those as reminders as I make choices about my day. But for me, I don't frame any of them as goals. So if a client is insistent and a client finds value in goals, I'm not against using them with the client. I just don't offer them or volunteer them. Does that help?
Thank you. It seems like a completely different approach to change and transformation.
Yeah. Yeah, if I'm an elite athlete and I want to make the Olympics and I know what my time is, then goals can be helpful in a way. But if you've ever played an elite sport, or if sport seriously, if you've ever pursued a craft seriously, you know that most of your best performances were not because of your mind. It was because of your mind actually relaxing enough to let your body do what it knew how to do. A lot of the injuries that occur in sports happen right before breaks because people's mind and body separate as their mind thinks about, oh, I get to put the ice pack on in a few minutes, or I get to sit down and rest. And their body and their mind become disconnected and they often lose focus and get hurt. And so for me, I want to have the whole person in the session, not the person who fantasizes about being somebody or somewhere else, but I want them to be here now with me. And then we start to get clear about what they're hoping that this other place or other being will give them. And we're helping them move towards that as they best understand it without having to have a goal. Yeah, there's a lot. Is that enough for now? Yeah, we have a whole module actually in the narrative coaching program about how to work without goals. And if you get me going and buy me a beer, you could have hours of this. But Yeah, for me, it's like I want us to think of coaching as two humans having an intentional conversation. And I find that the obsession with goals for me often gets in the way of that more often than we realize. And you see this in corporations where people, a lot of the behaviors that we are trying to coach out of people are their compensations for dealing with toxic cultures that are obsessed with goals that may or not be healthy for people, for the environment, for anything. And when we actually feel aligned and on purpose, most people do amazing things.
David, if I could just add on to
Great.
something where your definition of having a conversation, I'd just like to add that something I learned about narrative coaching is that the coach's words and phrases are primarily silence. And the more we can hold on to that silence, the more we allow the emergence of what the coachee actually is looking for and needs.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a funny irony, Colin. I'm sure you've heard me say this, but I used to do a lot of demonstrations for like graduate coaching programs. And I think I was very baffling to people because they often I would be coaching one of their fellow students and they say, well, we've been working with each other on these practices all year. And in 10 minutes, you got them to do things and say things we never heard before. And on top of that, you didn't say anything. Like, how did that even happen? And I said, I'm not paid as a client by the word. I'm not paid to talk. I'm paid to actually be with people, to allow them to make sense of and meaning of and choices around what's important to them. And to Colin's point, I find we often overfill the coaching space with talking. And I find that silence, we think of silence as the ground upon which everything else is built. It's the natural state of the universe. And talking is optional. So anything else about narrative coaching? And then I'd like to talk about our third program and then see anything else that's sort of on your mind.
So there's nothing in the chat for the moment, David. So I think
okay.
I'm going to head off.
All right. All right. So just to follow up just quickly on the question about these talks I gave, and there's more to come next year. Well, actually this year. I keep saying next year, but it's here already. This is January. So for me, what can I focus on here? So I feel like I'll just go back to the very first narrative coaching demonstration and talk I ever gave was in 2005 in Sydney, in Australia. And the very first question I was asked is the same question I'm asked every single time. This sounds like therapy. And my response is then is the same response I've given for what now? 17 years. Every coaching conversation involves an element of healing to some degree for the client. So there is a therapeutic element in every coaching conversation. Otherwise, why bother in some ways? Because it's not just, and again, this goes back to goals. It's not just that we need to help, or we're invited to help clients be clear about what they really want and how they might get that, but who will they have to become to naturally do that going forward? And that often requires healing, like places where the client feels wounded, where the client feels broken or insecure or shamed or whatever. if they don't find a way to heal some of those cracks in their foundation, there won't be enough support for the new behaviors they're trying to develop through coaching. So for me, I feel like we should all respect our professional boundaries and identities. We shouldn't be coaching in spaces where we don't belong. So I have clients who I discover have substance abuse issues. I know some about that, but that's not really my expertise or my passion. So I might give them some resources to help them with that particular aspect of what they're wrestling with, rather than pretend I can help them at the level they might need. And the irony of this is that more and more therapists are moving into coaching because, for a lot of reasons, but because they're finding value in some of the action orientations in coaching that we often don't find in psychotherapy. So I feel like a lot of I'll wrap this up by saying, I feel like a lot of the silos we've created over the years around professional identities are blurring. And that this will be a nice segue to the ID program, but even in narrative coaching, there are a number of roles based on your own background and training and preferences that you can play for a client. And one of the things we're doing, if we go back to this picture, if you look at the one on the right there, you're kind of in this space with the client. And you might, like when I used to be able to work more in person, I often would be moving my chair often. Sometimes just a couple of inches, sometimes many yards. I want to situate myself in the field in ways that allow me to do different kinds of work. Like I might be, it may be clear to me that the story has an obvious purpose for being in this conversation that the client continues to avoid. I might move my chair to a space in the room where I imagine the story or a character in the story is sitting. And I might speak on behalf of the character. Hey, I'm trying to talk to you, right? I might try to get the client's attention. So part of the value and where I think coaching is going is in always going back to the duty of care around doing no harm, allowing yourself to free yourself from, I have to sit still and do and be a coach and do this coaching thing, when in reality, your client may need something completely different from you. And so it's the freedom which narrative coaching, I feel, brings and has always brought to morph ourselves in a conversation within the boundaries of what's acceptable and appropriate for us to meet the needs that are emerging in the conversation. Okay? All right. So it's a perfect segue to this. So integrative development started maybe 12, 15 years ago. I want to just give you a little backstory so it helps explain kind of where this came from. So I was doing a lot of work in healthcare and government and education around embedding coaching skills for managers, leaders, and teams. And I had a passion for just kind of work that way for programs that served children, either in medical settings and government programs and in education. And I found that whole like health education space fascinating. And there was a woman that ran a large organization that served disabled children that heard me talk. And some months later, she called me and she said, I'd like to have a conversation with you. And I would like you to come and teach. They had about 400 employees, I think. I'd like you to come teach coaching skills to all of us, basically. And I listened to her more, and I said, what's your budget for this? And she said, well, we got this large grant, and we want to use our grant to do this. And I said, no, I want to take this job. She's like, what? And I said, because I know how hard you would have had to work to get that grant. I know how rare those grants are. And I think there's a better way for you to spend your money. She goes, okay, what is that? And I said, I don't know. I'll call you tomorrow. And what I did, I went home and I had been doing all these really innovative ways of working with different clients. And I realized that all these pieces that I said, I bet you I could put all these together. And so I created a sort of a framework for her. And I came back in the next couple of days and we had a meeting and said, this is what I'd like to do ahead of time. And here's the projects where I've done all these pieces. But I was honest with her. I said, I've never done all this with intention as at the start of a project, but I've done all these pieces very successfully in other places. She said, I trust you. I said, I think this is a good thing. And so we spent 2 years together and transformed her organization from top to bottom to the point where they were by far the leader in the state at what they did. They were so successful in their outcomes for their kids, they got the state government to rewrite policies for all the programs like theirs in the state because they were so much more effective. And so what integrative development allowed me to do was to, which I then have only worked that way since then, is that allowed them to hire David. Not an OD consultant or a coach or a trainer, hire David. Just come be David. And so I probably had 10 or 12 different roles, often in the same day, that I played for them. And we worked with the entire organization. And we did one training for half a day in the very beginning, which was basically on ethnography, mindfulness, and observation. And we had them go out and observe themselves with a little bit of understanding about what coaching looked like. And I said, what do you notice about yourself? What do you like about what you're noticing? What do you not like? And if your clients were here right now, what would they most wish were different from you? And so they had identified a whole bunch of things that they were shocked to realize that they didn't like. And so we created a little value chain map around all that, about the flow of from the minute a parent calls and said, I'm concerned for my child, all the way through their program and how they graduated from the program. And we identified 5 key touch points where coaching could be helpful. And then we had them go observe themselves at that touch point in their process and come back and talk to each other about what they discovered. So we didn't do any training for 6 months. And even a lot of that wasn't by me, it was by people in the organization that were really good at this. And so they slowly, one by one, identified things they wanted to change, explored how they might do that differently. We coached them to develop new strategies around how to do that. And the thing about ID is that it overcomes the problem for most organizations that training and coaching and organizational development and things like that are completely separate activities. And so one of the mantras for ID is we should stop sending changed people back into unchanged environments, because the environment always wins. And so we get people to notice and change their own environment as a precursor for changing themselves. It makes it much easier for them to try new things and be better selves if the environment is set up. Quick example. In this organization, their first place they identified to work was what was called an intake meeting. So you might ring up and say, when I observe my son at the preschool, he doesn't seem able to grasp or follow what's happening as well as the other kids around him. Can you help me understand why, or what should we be concerned, or why is that? And so they would bring the son in and put him through a battery of tests and assessments and observations. And then they would invite the parents back to an intake meeting. They would all sit up here in front, some in white coats because they were doctors or whatever. The parents would sit out there in this little room by themselves. And they would have documents this high, and they would talk to them for an hour about all the things they found out about their son. So for example, one of the ones I observed with them was this, they discovered that their son was mildly to moderately autistic, which they told them at some point about minute 17 in that hour-long presentation. And so when we were done, rather than give my feedback, I said, what did you notice about yourself? And they think, it's particularly if you put yourself in the parents' shoes, they were horrified. This is what we look like? This is what we sound like? And they all agreed, yes. And I said, after you said the word autistic, they didn't hear a single thing you said. And so what is, and I said, so what is the purpose of these meetings? Well, we have to make sure we communicate all the information to the parents. I said, no, the purpose of the meeting is to get them to come back, which many parents didn't. They were too afraid and they were too overwhelmed and they were too whatever. And so I said, so how could you do this differently to help the parents? And so one of the women said, well, I think we have too much information. Well, why do you have too much information? Well, we've got lawyers and bureaucrats and forms and blah, blah, blah. I said, you have to fill those out, but you don't have to give them to the parents on the first meeting. So what if you just created one page and you talk to them for 5 minutes with the highlights of the one page? Ask them if they have any questions. Give them the one page. Give them your phone number. Ask them to call you back when they want to talk more. What is it? And so they began to bring out ideas from each other that way. And over the course of 6 months, they reinvented the entire process from top to bottom. So for me, ID then becomes sort of a learning and development theory that allows us to be like the person on the right, not the person on the left. So if you imagine these people in this program, they felt duty bound by their professional bodies to bring the entire boulder to the family and then hand it to the family, say, here, what do you think? And of course, the parents go, we can't carry this. We don't know what enough of these words mean. And so so ID basically frees practitioners to put everything they know in their back pocket, everything. So I haven't done a traditional training for an organizational client for 8 years, and I'll never do them again, ever. They're a waste of my life and their money. So I don't do leadership programs the old way anymore. I've stopped MBA programs because it's just a lot of talking and yakking, and I don't observe very much really ever changes. So the whole purpose for ID is to recognize how do we free ourselves to be with a client, whether it's in a classroom, in a coaching session, talking to your kid after school, whatever it is. What is the potential for learning and development in this moment? And how do I help the other person make the most of it? So so for me, if I go back to these people watching their peers do these intake meetings, their eyes were this big, like they were just staggered at what they actually looked like and sounded like. So they knew that it could just as easily be them up front. So I got them to put all of that gigantic boulder down and say, what do the parents need? They need to be like this person on the bike. It's either a woman or a man with very beautiful long hair, and I want them to be able to ride, to be free. We're empowered to go figure out what our son needs. We can understand this as we go. We can see the agency as our partner, not our provider. And they can leave like maybe feeling a little bit heavy-hearted or a little bit concerned, but they've got a little bag on the front of their bike with everything they need for the next step. And so in ID, it's the other half of NR, in that we will teach you a fundamentally different way of thinking about learning and development that you can incorporate in how you design training programs, change interventions, even in your coaching. It allows you to let go of being an expert, even if you are. Because it doesn't matter what you know, it matters what they can do. Last thing I'll say is you could be sitting in a room, maybe doing a workshop on giving feedback to 30 managers or leaders. Many of the people would have had many of these workshops over the years, and are probably not any better than they were after the first one. They don't need more information about feedback. They don't need our models. They just need the ability to understand what actually gets in my way of me giving better feedback. What do I actually need to address? If you had 30 people in the room, they've got 30 different learning moments. Most of which your curriculum, no matter how brilliant and beautiful it was and how hard you worked to build it, is going to be irrelevant. You know, and I'll just give you a stark example. So one of the people in one of my workshops years ago, before I was enlightened, and I was still believing that my trainings mattered, we were doing a session for a professional services firm about giving feedback. And we were talking a bit about clarity and conviction and what you shared. And this person pulled me aside on a break and said, if I had talked like that growing up in my family, I would have been smacked by my father. Okay, that's not in my curriculum. And I realized the arrogance we have, I'll speak for myself, the arrogance I have that I know what you need, that I should tell you what I know because you need it, and that you have the capacity to deliver and enact what I'm trying to teach you. So if we've learned nothing but this from all the efforts around diversity, where do we have privileges that others do not? Where do we have possibilities and structures and safeties that others do not? And I'm not interested in telling you what I know, and you'll see this in the programs. I'm interested in what you already know that I can help you use more effectively. And how do we liberate your capacity to work this way with your clients more often? All right. So I think, oh yeah, and we're going to teach you how to be 5-year-old skiers. You'll see why if you take this program. But so we've got about 5 minutes. I wanted to see if there's anything else that we haven't covered that would be helpful to you. I'm going to move through and see what we have here. Okay, good. I'll just put this up as a reference point, but what reflections do you have? Any questions you have that you would find valuable? Sabine.
Yes, David. How do these 3 programs articulate?
Tell me some more about what you mean by articulate.
You know, I followed narrative coaching with you about 2 years ago or 3 years. I don't know. It's going so fast.
Yeah.
And I just, you know, I'd like to know more how that idea fits with narrative coaching, or, you know, what the difference is between the different programs.
Yeah, okay. That's great. So, yeah. It may be in time that ID and NR merge into one program. We're sort of working on that possibility, but narrative coaching is, again, it's our take on coaching. It's a frame that people recognize, and it's just showing you what we think is a different and better way to coach. So when you know, as a coach, sometimes you encounter clients that have a lot of challenges maybe in their life or their situation, and you're being asked to hold space with them around that. So the narrative release is really around your own capacity to work at a deeper level with people in whatever context you're working in. It could be as a parent, it could be as a consultant, it could be, you know, whatever's happening in your community. And it's this whole idea of working at thresholds with people. And it really is that inner journey for you to do the work on yourself. So every single module will be about one aspect of this, and it always starts with yourself. What is your journey in that space? So you start to realize, like, you know, for me, I grew up in a family where people didn't cry. You weren't allowed to talk about sadness. My parents never grieved the loss of their parents, ever, that I could see. Never talked about that, or And so one of the promises I made to myself was, I don't want to live my life that way. So I went on to learn a lot about grief. So narrative release is really more of a personal journey for yourself, both for your own well-being, but also to do the same for others. ID is more the outer-facing part of that, where it's particularly if you'd like to bring some of the principles and practices you learned in narrative coaching to scale. So you'd like to do this with teams, with groups, to reimagine how you might do workshops, to see your role in supporting growth with your clients, particularly in terms of, we have a lot of, for me, broken approaches. Our schools don't really work well anymore. Training doesn't really work well anymore, to me, for most things. And so leadership development doesn't work as well as we think. And so I just think there's a huge opportunity to bring the theory that sits behind ID into a lot of different places. And if that's if your orientation is more on kind of doing things differently out in the world, ID is probably the one for you. They all come from the same philosophy. They use some of the same tools. It's mostly around the orientation of where we focus most of the energy.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I know the time is ticking away, but I just want to say thank you so much for the individual pieces and the integration and just sharing of the arc of your journey to get us to this place. It's always impactful to hear you describe the mental models and the heart integration with all the models, your heart integration.
Yeah. Thank you. Lawrence.
Yeah, I had a really obvious question. I think I've got the answer now.
Okay.
So the programs that start in a few weeks,
yes,
they're on US times. Is there 2 sittings, like the 10 a.m. and 6 p.m., 2 cohorts?
Yes. So you can come to either or both of them. It'll be the same session twice a day, and just come to the one that fits your time zone.
I now get it, because obviously 6 p.m. Eastern time is 11 o'clock in the UK, so that's just too late. But the 10 a.m. works.
Yes.
Great.
And by the way, so all of the sessions will be recorded. So if you miss one for whatever reason, you always can listen to them later.
David, how long is the NC program?
So all the programs are 9 modules in about 9+ months. And we're going to do something differently next year. We're building a much more robust certification and graduate program. And so next year will be all intact in itself. And then if you want to come back for certification, that'll be the following year, and it'll be all about structured practice. So we wanted to do more to support our graduates, but all the programs follow the same flow. And they have 4 components for each of the modules. Some are in live group sessions, and some are on your own, and some are with your small mastermind and practice group. I think there's a email address at the end here. Yeah, so this is the structure for all of them. This is the cost for them, and this will this will be on the video if you want to watch. This recording will be available if you want to watch this again, and you can just go to our website if you want to register, and then there's also a contact us button there if you want to ask more questions or you have anything else you want to know. We're happy to help out.
David, just a quick one. Daniel has an interesting question.
Yes.
I don't know if you can see it, but it's he's interested in ID from a learning and development perspective. Is NC important to work through first in order to, if he's new to the narrative work?
Our recommendation is yes, because it's a more familiar terrain, it's an easier way to grasp the philosophy. We have some people that don't do a lot of coaching that are starting with ID. We have a few people that are actually doing both. But if you're new to all this and you do some coaching, we would recommend starting with narrative coaching, and ID will make more sense then, and you'll be able to work more with it as you go forward.